So for years and years, people have believed that eating fat would make them fat and it would damage their heart. And I still hear patients say that to me. Can't eat this, makes me fat. That's fattening food. But we can say thanks to Ansel Keys and the sugar industry, because in the 1960s, Ansel Keys plus the sugar industry paid scientists to play down the link between sugar and heart disease and promote saturated fat as the culprit. So much data around that. In fact, in 2010, they did a review of all the studies around saturated fat and heart disease, and it was very inconclusive. In fact, they found no connection or correlation between that. So the fat was not the issue, but the sugar and the carbs certainly have been. So I can remember way back when my mom was using things like margarine, because margarine was considered to be so much better than butter. And what she would do is that she would mix half the butter with half the margarine, because my father was adamant he wasn't going to ever eat that stuff. And she thought she was doing us all a great favor, but she really wasn't. And at this time, we started to eat low-fat foods and very high-sugar foods. And that was considered to be high sugar, high carbohydrates. That was considered to be the really healthy diet. But, you know, one of the things that we know now is that 37.5% of Americans, their saturated fat intake comes from pizza, ice cream, cookies, cakes, processed meats, burritos, fries, pasta, candy, and chips, which begs the question in these studies that have found this link between saturated fat and heart disease. Is it the saturated fat itself, or is it the fact that the saturated fat is coming from processed junk foods like the ones I've just mentioned? So that's always been the whole issue around this. So what are these different types of fats that we actually do consume? So there are saturated fats, there are monounsaturated fats, there are polyunsaturated fats, and there are trans fats. And they are all categorized based on their chemical structures. And their chemical structures are sort of through fatty chain acids and the bonds. But I'm not going to bore you with the chemistry on this, although it's very interesting. So let's start with saturated fats. So saturated fats are going to be things like meat. We all know that meat is saturated. So whether it be pork or lamb or wild meat or bison or goat, pretty much those animals have a high proportion of saturated fats. But there's also cocoa butter, which we find in chocolate, and then dairy, cheese, milk, cream, all of those things, eggs, palm oil, and coconut oil. And we'll talk a little bit more about coconut oil because it's kind of a little different. It has saturated fats, but it also has medium-chain triglycerides, which is another kind of fat. And it's digested. Of all the fats, it's digested very differently than the ones I'm going to talk about. In fact, what happens is from the stomach to the liver, it goes from the stomach to the liver where it's instantly metabolized. And this is when we start to talk about ketosis, a form of energy. But I'll come back to that. So besides the saturated fat, there's monounsaturated fat. So this is olive oil, olives, avocado, macadamias, chicken and duck fat, lard, and tallow. There's polyunsaturated fats, and of these, there are two families. One is omega-6 and omega-3. And we always want to have a balance between omega-6s and omega-3s. Omega-3s, we know, are fish oils, flax seeds, and they are anti-inflammatory. Omega-6s are corn oil, cottonseed oil, soybean oil, safflower oil, peanut oil, canola oil, sunflower oil, all the oils that are made from grains, seeds, and some of the nuts. The problem about omega-6s is that they are pro-inflammatory, as omega-3s are anti-inflammatory. And the idea around this is to balance the two and not have more of the one family and less of the other. I very seldom see patients have more omega-3s to omega-6s. We would find that in cultures like the Japanese culture and their different types of cuisine where seafood is very high on their list. Omega-6s is very prevalent in our diet because lots of the animals, chickens, etc., are corn-fed. That means more of the omega-6s. So it's more of a pro-inflammatory diet. Then of all the fats, which is the most dangerous, of course, is going to be the trans fats. So what happened with trans fats is we hydrogenated these fats, we added different molecules to it, and we changed the molecular structure of these fats, making them the most dangerous fats. So when we think about cell membranes, all our cell membranes are fat-derived and made from fats. There's 2 layers of them. But the thing about trans fats, because we changed the structure, they don't fit well into those cell membranes. And they cause the cell membranes to become very brittle, which means that things can't get in and out of the cell. And hence, they were the most dangerous fats. We in California stopped the use of trans fats, but you certainly can find them in processed foods like cookies and crackers. So whenever you're reading those labels on those ingredients, if you see hydrogenated soy oil or anything hydrogenated, it's got trans fats in it, and you pretty much want to not eat it. The other fat we talk about, or the fatty substance, is cholesterol. You know, it's produced by the liver. And we need it for so many different functions. You know, the body uses it to help build cell membranes. It's very important for the brain. The brain uses up to 25% of the cholesterol we make on the body. And it's a key building block for hormone production. So without it, we would not be able to make adequate levels of testosterone or any of our estrogens, progesterone, and cortisol. So then we think about what do we need for the brain. So the brain is 60% fat. It's the fattest organ of the body, and being called a fathead is very appropriate. So we need fats for the brain. We need the omega-3s, and of the omega-3s, we need DHA. So when we talk about omega-3s, we normally talk about EPA, which is the eicosanoic hexanoic acid, and then the DHA portion of that. But the EPA is not as important for the brain as the DHA is. And we also need saturated fats for the brain because the saturated fats are important for making myelin. Myelin is a fatty layer of insulation which helps brain cells communicate with each other. In fact, myelin covers all our nerves too. So we definitely need the saturated fats for that. The weight, also, fats are important. When you eat enough of the right kinds of fat without too many carbs, you teach your body to burn fat for fuel rather than glucose. And this whole process of using fat as a form of energy is known as ketosis. The other thing, too, is fat doesn't trigger the release of insulin like glucose does. And insulin is always considered to be the fat storage hormone. So the more of the insulin we produce, if we're eating refined carbohydrates and too much sugar, the more fats get stored as fat in the tissue. Hormones, fats are needed for making testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. Fat also releases leptin. So this is a hormone that stops us from overeating. It tells the brain you're full, stop eating. Unfortunately, we override this messaging, and our portions sometimes are a little bit too big. Cell membranes, fats really required for the vitality or for keeping our cells healthy. So fat makes up the protective coverings that surround every cell in the body. It's kind of 2 layers of fat which controls everything that goes in and out of the cell. And this is where saturated fats are important because it gives those cells structure, holds it up. Fats are also important for satiety and appetite suppression. So satiety means satisfaction. You feel satisfied after you've eaten meals that have high fats in them. So They also make you feel full longer, and they help you maintain steady blood sugar levels. You don't get hangry and grapple with energy crashes through the day when there's more fat in the diet. In fact, when patients are looking to come off that whole refined carbohydrates and high sugar diets, I use a lot of fat to help balance them through the course of the day. And it makes it so much easier from an addiction point of view and cravings, And the thing about fat, too, is it does help you when it comes to craving. You don't crave as much. Also, fat's really required for keeping our moods up. Lots of fish, lots of fat can help moods and can also lessen some of the depression. Then we've got vitamins. So we've got fat-soluble vitamins, and those are vitamins A, D, E, and K. Now, how this works is that fat carries these vitamins through the bloodstream into the liver and then into the body fat where they get stored until needed. So a lot of times when I'm looking at vitamin D3 levels and they're low with patients, although they've been supplementing for a while, I ask how they're taking those supplements and whether they're taking that with some eggs in the morning that has a high amount of fat, or some avocado, or they're having something that has some form of fat in it, because that's really important. So if we recap why we need fats, we need them for the brain, we need them for every single cell membrane, we need them for the myelin sheath, which is that protection sheath, we need it for energy because the mitochondria, which makes our energy, these are the little powerhouses in our cells, they work much better with fat as their source of energy than they do with glucose. We need them for hormones. We need them for insulin control. They also help to reduce inflammation. They support our immunity, satiety, and they help us with weight loss. And they are delicious. Most people love some kind of fat. So what are the best fats that we should be eating? Of course, olive oil. Now, olive oil is important because it has those polyphenols in them. And if you've been following me for a while, you'll know that I'm always going to be talking about phytochemicals or phytonutrients. These are the things that we get from plants, and they function in many different ways, but they are antioxidant, antimicrobial, antiviral. They are very good at signaling our healthy genes. They help repair our cell membranes. They're very good for reducing inflammation, and they support immunity. So we need phytochemicals. Olive oil has ilopriene, hydroxytyrosol, and tyrosol. Those are three major flavones or polyphenols. And then they've got another 30 polyphenols in them that I'm not even going to mention. But this is probably one of the links with the Mediterranean diet. Olive oil plays such a huge role in all the data that's researched around the Mediterranean diet. I think it's olive oil, and I also think it's lifestyle. They have a different way of viewing how they function in the world. So if you're buying olive oil, you always want to choose, the first cold-pressed extra virgin olive oil, and it needs to be in a dark glass bottle. Often I'll be walking through places like Costco, and if I see great olive oil in a glass bottle, I might buy it. But never in a plastic bottle. Don't buy oil in plastic because the interaction between plastic and fats is not great. And there's all kinds of toxins and BPAs and those kinds of things with plastic and fats because the fats absorb it and hold it, and then you're ingesting that, and it has an impact on your body. So the polyphenols, or these flavonols, have a very pungent, sometimes peppery flavor. And you can get that when you're tasting some of the different olive oils. They'll have different flavors, and it might be from those polyphenols, but we need them. And, with olive oil, you don't cook with it unless it's on a low heat. But I always use olive oil as a finishing oil. And I like to have 2 or 3 bottles of different olives. So the flavor is very different. I go through a lot of olive oil in my kitchen. So we want to be increasing those fats. So I have some recipes for you, and I thought of these, especially as it's Mother's Day on Sunday. And so for those of you who are moms, happy Mother's Day to you. And for those of you who are celebrating your moms, happy Mom's Day to them too. And you could maybe make some of these. They're pretty easy to do, and they're quite yummy. Or you could get someone else to make them for you. So there's a lemon bar. It's got almond flour in it, which is great. It's got half a cup of butter or ghee. Butter's so great for the body, so great for the brain. It's got eggs in it, so the egg yolks, of course, it's got all the nutrients in it that we need to, that's so important for the brain. And by the way, the cholesterol thing, forget about it. Eggs is not linked with cholesterol. And it's got some lemons in it too. So it's quite a simple little recipe. And if you want those, send me an email for that. And then I've got another one here for almond flour and vanilla pancakes, again, using almond flour and some butter in there too. And as I say, these are for Mother's Day. So if you've got any questions around the fat story, now would be a good time to ask them. You can unmute. And otherwise, you can send me an email, and I will send you some recipes.